Good afternoon, everyone. We'll call to order the board policy meeting at 3:37 on Tuesday, March 19th. On our agenda today is policy BDF, Parent Community Advisory Board, which is a conversion of Board Rule 602. Policy BBA, which is Board Powers and Responsibilities, which is also a board conversion of Board Rule 101.0, 102.0, 102.02, and 701.01. And then a conversation on the equity policy. So we will begin with BDF. Mr. Gant, are you our presenter?
Yes.
Excellent, welcome.
Right. Thank you, Commissioners, Dr. Santelises. I'm going to start with policy BDF, which is the Parent and Community Advisory Board. So just for a little background information, the Parent Community Advisory Board, aka PCAB, is the point of contact for the parents in the community throughout the system to bring information back to the board and the CEO so that the board and CEO may have the information to make appropriate policy decisions based on the information they receive. So today we're tackling this policy because one is we're in the process of converting all board rules, and there's also a policy addition that's not in the board rule, which I'll get to. So PCAB was established by statute in 1997, and again they serve to consult with the board and the CEO to ensure parental involvement in the development and implementation of policies. PCAB has a board comprised of 14 members. 3 are appointed by the plaintiffs of Vaughn G. And right now, currently, Disability Rights Maryland appoints those board members on those plaintiffs' behalf. 2 are appointed by members of the plaintiffs in the Bradford litigation, and currently the ACLU appoints those members on those plaintiffs' behalf. And the other 7 members are appointed by the CEO with approval by the board. 3 members from a list submitted by the PTA Council, 2 members from a list submitted by the area-based parent networks, 2 members from a list submitted by Title I liaisons, and finally 2 members are appointed by the CEO from other parent and community groups. So in addition to the proposed policy that was added after feedback from PCAB was influence on the policy matrix. The board policy matrix is the list of policies that the board will be considering for the upcoming school year. The board approves these at the board annual business meeting every year. Under the proposed policy, PCAB will have an opportunity to give feedback on the matrix at least 6 weeks prior to approval at the board business meeting. So again, this is a policy addition that was not in the original board rule. So we talked about kind of the history of PCAB and their board, but I guess the other question is what does PCAB do? So I'm going to briefly go through some of the ways they do get their charge and mission done. PCAB currently has quarterly meetings with the CEO. They distribute surveys to parents on upcoming policies, and one example I can think of was the Army School Police, where they did a survey on that. They have regular meetings and communication with the CEO's staff. For example, in February, they did a meeting with the several chiefs on the Maryland State Report Card. They are a recognized group at board meetings, which means they have a preserved 5-minute slot at every board meeting to present. They have monthly general body meetings on the first and third Thursday of every month. PCAB has an opportunity to review upcoming policies and receive a presentation from staff prior to debut at this committee. They perform advocacy on behalf of parents. They attend PTO/PTA meetings throughout the district. And new this year, all PCAB members have adopted 5 geographically diverse schools to kind of check in on and build a relationship. So if you are interested in learning more about PCAB, they can be reached at pcab@bcps.k12.md.us or at their Facebook page. And the next general meeting is actually Thursday at 6:30 in this room. Okay.
Thanks, Christian. Where are the regulations? Is there a regulation for this document, for this policy?
No, I didn't create a regulation. I didn't think it was necessary, but if you all have any feedback for the creation of a regulation, I can incorporate that prior to the debut at the next board meeting.
Do you have anything on that?
I think we should consider some sort of regulation for the policy to be consistent with the other policies that we have. I think it should be something ongoing. Another question is the board policy matrix. Can you explain that? and the addition that that PCAB will now have input on the board policy matrix?
Sure. So the board policy matrix is the list of policies that will be coming through policy committee and going to first reader and then going for final approval to the board. So every spring, the CEO and this committee collaborate on the upcoming topics. So PCAB will now have an opportunity to sit with the policy committee prior to final approval to kind of give their feedback on the proposed list of topics.
For the next year?
Right, for the upcoming school year.
So it will be, so we will do that before the annual meeting?
Right, so yes. So for this year, they will meet for the list of topics for school year 1920.
Thanks. Are there members of PCAB in the room right now? Okay. Thank you.
So thank you for your work on this. A couple of things to consider putting on the regulations would be things like, what's the calendar timeline for appointment? Is it a July 1 to July 1? Is it January 1, September, October? So that we know generally, and included in that timeline, when the window is open for appointments. So if someone is interested that may not be connected to PTA to be one of the nominees, they know when to reach out, whom to reach out to, as well as when the board should expect to see those names for potential appointment candidates to vote on. So that those kinds of pieces in timeline calendar. The funding budgeting structure, we fund PCAB out of the board's budget. Is there or should there be any sort of thresholds for minimums and maximums for percentages of board?
Or if they're going to potentially recommend a proposed budget to be
Correct.
approved. So would that also be, should we also have a timeline for that, when
Correct.
that should be in before it comes to the board for us to,
Exactly. And-
for the board exec or whoever creates that?
Yep, and also in fiduciary responsibility along those lines, if PCAB should apply for a grant, are there indirect costs that should be considered as a part of that come back to the board's operating budget, or whichever organization within the system is going to manage that for them? And then the final thing that I would think in my brainstorming needed to be on a regulation is when PCAB formally reports out to the board their actions, their activities, whether it's a quarterly written, here's the sort of the schools we've adopted, here's some of the actions we've done, here's our needs, here's our weaknesses, so that we can better support their ability to access the resources and the kids that they need to be in contact with.
Okay, thank you for that feedback.
Absolutely. Anything else, Commissioner McFadden? Then the only other question that I have about the actual policy is on the policy document, Roman number 1, policy standards, letter A, number 3. I'm wondering if you can just simply explain this a little bit more. For those of you who are listening and may not have those numbers, it's the explanation of exactly who needs to be nominated to the different seats in PCAB, so 3 from PTA, but there's nothing in there about ensuring representation diversity that matches our students. There's nothing about gifted and talented parents or parents of gifted and talented students. There's nothing about representation from across the city, regionally, nothing that says there must be parent from elementary, middle, secondary, charter, traditional. So I don't know if that's going above and beyond the scope of the policy, but if you could talk to that a little bit so that we're clearer on whether that should be encompassed or not.
Sure, I can let you know how that language ended up there. Some of this is statutory. So statutorily, these are the current members.
Right.
I will say that statute is pretty old, so it might be something we could look at, including our legislative update and updating that. But that language is statutory. So we could look at maybe at the regulation, including some of those diversity, inclusiveness and diversity inclusiveness points. But this list is what's listed in statute.
Correct, but as I understand it, statute is a threshold, is a minimum threshold, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So in the policy, we could go above and beyond that.
We can
for
definitely go above and
expectations.
beyond. So I think we could, if potentially you have to keep this language, but you maybe have something else saying within the scope of these picks, there has to be.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah. Just because I could easily see how every single one of these criteria could be met by parents from, not to pick on, but just everybody could be from Roland Park, elementary, middle, and we could have checked that box. And that may not be the parent community or advocacy organization that truly represents the needs of all students in the city.
Okay.
Okay? Anything else?
Could I also recommend that what might be helpful as the board discusses this particular policy to actually have some history of the demographics and representation in said categories or other
great.
categories from a kind of long arc perspective, so that we can see actually based on membership what quadrants of the city actually have been represented by PCAB. What's the diversity of the schools? I'm not saying you've got to list out 50 different items, but
No.
it might be helpful to give the board some context of what the current makeup, demographics, and diversity of PCAB is, as they consider which categories they might want to see within the policy.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, and we certainly don't want to dilute it, make it we have to have 3 redheads and 2 tall guys, and, we don't need it to be that comprehensive, but as it's written, there's nothing to ensure that there is any.
Right, which is why I think as the board considers which categories, since based on what you're saying, and, I would agree, we don't want to necessarily be a laundry list or check-off list. I do think it would be helpful to consider kind of what has kind of current practice yielded over a particular period of time, and then that might give the board some further information to decide which elements you all might want to prioritize.
Okay.
And that might even be nicely included in when the candidates for appointment are presented to the board, to present with, here's who served for the last 3 years from, these geographical categories, or so that we can make sure that that we have a longitudinal equity represented as well.
Okay.
Others? Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Gann. We will move on to policy BBA, board powers and responsibilities. And I'll do those numbers again because I'm sure I did them wrong in the intro. Conversion of board rules 101.01, 102.01, 102.02, and 701.01. Is that you as well?
Yes.
Excellent. And pay you overtime today. Should give this man a raise.
Okay, Commissioners and Dr. Santulisa, I'm presenting on board policy BBA, board powers and responsibilities. So first, again, why are we doing this? Since 2006, the board has made a concerted effort to convert all board rules into board policy. This particular policy will serve as guidance for the public and the administration of the board's powers and responsibilities. So just a little history. Prior to 1997, city schools functioned basically as a department of Baltimore City. Legislation that passed by the General Assembly in 1997 created a new city-state partnership and a new entity, the current Baltimore City Board of School Commissioners. The board is its own legal entity, and it's not a department of the city or the state. The partnership is intended to improve the quality of education in Baltimore through increased funding from the state and improve the management and administration of city schools. The partnership also has ensured that city schools operate the same as the other 23 LEAs in Maryland, school districts in Maryland. Namely, the board is the sole entity that oversees the operations of these schools. Previously, the mayor and the governor were jointly responsible for appointment of commissioners. However, legislation passed in 2017 removes the governor's role. So currently, the mayor of Baltimore City is the only person that appoints and reappoints school board members. So again, touching on the same points, the purpose of the board is to raise the level of academic achievement of the students in Baltimore City public school system and improve the management and administration of the public school system in Baltimore City. The board's mission, excellence in education for every child at every level by focusing on quality instruction, managing systems efficiently, and sustaining a culture of evidence. And the board's vision, that every student will graduate ready to achieve excellence in higher education in the global workforce. So this isn't a comprehensive list. I'm sure we could get into the nitty-gritty of all the board's powers and responsibilities, but broadly speaking, these are kind of the high points of the board's powers and responsibilities. Establishing policies for the conduct and management of city schools. And just for a little background, these policy, kind of like the policy matrix piece we just talked about, the policy topics are jointly determined by the board and the CEO. Approving an annual budget, appointing the CEO and conducting an annual evaluation, appointing all principals, teachers, and other certificated and non-certificated personnel, setting the legislative agenda for the district, establishing a personnel system governing certificated and non-certificated employees, establishing curriculum guides and courses of study, adjudicating appeals of decisions made by the CEO, review and approval of public charter school applications, and establishing a procurement system and specifically approving expenditures above $25,000. So these are some of the reporting requirements that city schools are required to do. Again, these are kind of the high points. We could easily have a huge list of everything that the city schools has to report on. But broadly speaking, of course, we report extensively on our finances to the state of Maryland, and we go through numerous audits. The comprehensive master plan, and that comprehensive master plan came out of the 2002 Bridge to Excellence in Public Schools Act, which requires the district to develop and implement a comprehensive master plan to improve student achievement and eliminate achievement gaps, including performance and progress towards federal and state performance standards. So the board has to approve that submission annually. The Comprehensive Educational Facilities Master Plan, aka the CEFMP. This also has to be approved by the board, and it identifies current and future facility needs and provides a long-range perspective for solutions to address facilities challenges. And the 21st Century School Building Program Annual Report, another report that has to be approved by the board, and it reports on the progress of replacements, renovations, closures, target utilization, and maintenance planning for the 21st Century Schools program. As far as our duties to the city, after approval by the board, that budget, the city schools' annual budget, has to be submitted to the mayor and the city council for approval.
So, Christine, could you just clarify for us, if you go back to your last slide, the last bullet, submission of the city school's annual budget to the mayor and city council for approval. Yet when you go to the policy, the language itself on number 2 under reporting requirements, letter C, it says, at the request of the Baltimore City Council made in writing and at least 30 days before the reporting deadline, the board and CEO shall report to the city council on the fiscal year. That doesn't sound like city council approves or has approval power. So can you clarify that for me?
If I recall, I think the statute is a little gray. However, from speaking with legal and our research, I know that budget does have to be approved by the city council, but I'll reinvestigate to see if I can clarify the policy and make sure it's in alignment with the statute.
Yeah, and also under those regulation requirements, it says, or reporting requirements in the policy document itself, it says nothing about the mayor. It just says on the request of city council, so I don't know if that encompasses the mayor in the language as it's intended, or if we need to add that, if in fact the statute says that that's what needs to happen.
Okay, thank you for that.
Other comments, Commissioner McFadden? Okay, so then my other questions, philosophically on this, again, it's a conversion of board rules and it goes with Comar language, so much of it is mandated, but it also is the floor. So wondering if we did a comparison to best practices with Council Grade City School Districts, with CUBE districts, with TUTA districts, with districts around Maryland for board responsibilities around quasi-judicial and fiduciary responsibilities, to make sure that we are also commiserate, not just with the threshold floor of what we need to be doing for Comar, but also with best practices locally, regionally, and other districts that are similar. Anything to add, Dr. S?
No, I would just say I think that that's a good point, and we can do that.
Okay.
All right, and then the only other question that I have around this is, again, there are not regulations that are associated with this. Unlike the PCAB policy, I'm not quite so sure there's a ton of them, or maybe every other policy comes in as a regulation under this. But if there doesn't just need to be a statement of why there are no regulations, if there aren't, or C, crosswalk with policies, ABC and EFG and HIJ and KLM and OP, for the regulations for what this looks like in practice. Does that make sense?
You have to think about that, because I think philosophically I agree more that all the policies kind of broadly fit underneath
I do
this.
as well. I just, without a regulations, it looks like it might be incomplete, so just a statement of why there aren't any
Okay,
might cover that. And then the crosswalk of where you find, at whether you're going through, say, number 6, establish a personnel system governing certificated and non-certificated. C, also policy AFK. I'm making those letters up, I have no idea. For personnel governance policy. So that because it is such a big overarching policy that basically says, here's our general job, so that if people wanted to specifically find where they're connected, they don't have to do that themselves.
okay,
Right. Thank you very, very much.
all right, thank you.
That brings us to Dr. Durant, I believe, and the equity policy. Yep, welcome.
Good afternoon, Commissioners and Dr. Santelises. I'm pleased to bring forth a draft of the proposed racial equity policy. As you know, in June 2018, the board held a forum to seek input as it began discussions about the development of an equity policy, where it became clear that there was a need to create an equity policy to ensure success for students. On the very next day, the CEO and core program team met to review data and most specifically answer the question, what does the data tell us about equity and what our focus should be? The team, after extensive review of the data, agreed on racial equity as a focus. There were subsequent meetings held July through September 2018, where the team identified key components to the definition of racial equity, agreed upon a working definition of racial equity for the district, and generated ideas for measurable racial equity indicators. In November 2018, I joined the team as Director of Equity. Prior to my arrival, I spent time as both a Special Projects Manager and Specialist in the Department of Equity and Cultural Proficiency in Baltimore County Public Schools, where the team was responsible for implementation of Board Policy on Equity 0100. From November 2018 to January 2019, I held individual meetings with chiefs, executive directors, and selected external stakeholders. In late 2019, a Strategic Equity Task Force was formed and held its first meeting. The members of the Strategic Equity Task Force are listed in your document and on the screen. Several members are present with us today. The task force met 4 times between January through March 2019, with a sole focus on continuing the work started by the CEO and core program team, such that we would put forth a racial equity policy for board adoption in this academic year. It is the hope of the task force that the policy will establish and drive a framework necessary to achieve racial equity. There are several policy references we used as models to draft the policy that is before you today. The first is a reference to a proposed new regulation, which was put forth to the Maryland State Department of Education on September 25th, 2018, and then again on December 4th, 2018. The requested action was to repeal COMAR 13A.04.05, education that is multicultural, and replace it with COMAR 13A.04.06, educational equity. Under the new regulation as it is currently written, each local school system shall develop an equity policy and regulations to be reviewed every 3 years and shall address implementation of the equity policy through its local ESSA consolidated strategic plan as early as September 1, 2019. The new regulation has not been posted for public comment, so at this time we do not know when it will be adopted by the state board. As a member of the Network for Equity and Excellence in Education, I served on the subcommittee that drafted the language for the new regulation and currently serve as part of the team drafting an implementation guide which will serve as a companion document to the new regulation. Also noted here are Baltimore County Public Schools, Frederick County Public Schools, Portland Public Schools, and St. Paul Public Schools policies. Additional references are the Council of Chief State School Officers Leading for Equity document, as well as the Equity Policy and Platform document put forth by Teachers Democracy Project and Baltimore Movement of Rank and File Educators. It is important to note here that the task force agreed that the level of specificity outlined in these two documents are best suited in the implementation plan, which we'll discuss further. There were some high-level overview sessions presented, I should say, to our ILEDs, our core program team, our CLNs, and the cabinet. Additional roundtable and feedback sessions were held. There were 5 held in March, which provided opportunities to engage stakeholders. Attendees included parents, teachers, principals, district office staff, community members. Ms. Billups, the CCAC chair, was present. Commissioner McFadden attended one, and the mayor's education advisor. There were 4 questions asked at the roundtable discussions, which were: what topics do you hope the racial equity policy will address, call out? What do you expect the policy to require as a reflection that the district honors the culture, experiences, and humanity of the communities it serves? What changes and or new opportunities do you expect to see for students as the district puts a focus on ensuring equity in access to and representation in academic programming? And if the district builds staff capacity to teach and lead with a focus on ensuring equity, what behaviors do you expect to see change? It's also important to note here that much of the themes that emerge will also be best served in the implementation plan. Additional engagement sessions are scheduled as follows. There's a CEO community conversation on equity that will be held at Paul Lawrence Dunbar on March 28th. There's a presentation to CCAC on April 8th, and the Charter and Operator-led Schools Advisory Board on April 11th, and waiting on confirmation for a PCAB presentation April the 4th. In terms of the summary of the new policy, what we did, we looked at components of purpose statements in the other policies and used those to exemplars. There was some consistency around what each of those purpose statements called out, and they are definition of racial educational equity, definition call out of the problem and or symptoms, stating and owning the district's equity failures, stating district call to action, and declaring necessary action on part of the district, and stating the district mission and or ideals. The key components of the policy standards before you are disrupting and eliminating systemic inequities, honoring culture, experiences, and humanity of students, families, and community, ensuring access and representation in academic programming, and building staff capacity for equity-based teaching and leading. Following the board's adoption of the policy, the task force will be expanded to include additional members, parents, teachers, principals, district office staff, with a sole focus on providing guidance around the development of a 3-year implementation plan with particular focus on year 1 staff training and capacity building. In terms of implementation, depending on the additional feedback sessions and additional guidance from the board and CEO, the recommendations listed in this implementation section and the compliance one that follows may not be the most appropriate or where we end up landing. They are suggested based on our reading of policy. We will have to spend time on what those equity indicators will be, but generally we know that we will have to ensure the provisions of COMAR, and we'll have to develop and operationalize the policy in an annual plan for training and an evaluation plan. In terms of compliance, without question, the need for transparency and engagement was among the themes that came up consistently in our feedback sessions from both internal and external stakeholders. And so the development of an annual equity priority for every school, every office, an annual equity plan, an advisory committee, and a report to the board annually are some of the things that we're recommending at this time. I also anticipate that there will be additional guidance from MSDE once COMAR is adopted, and we will align as appropriate. In closing, I'd just like to note the following. This is definitely a starting place, not a staying place. We fully acknowledge that we will need to address other forms of inequity, bias, and oppression which intersect with race, and are absolutely committed to doing so. This is the first iteration of what we suppose will be several to come over the years as we develop our internal capacity and are adaptive in our leadership. We need to spend some time understanding how the historical and generational context of race, particularly in Baltimore, join with our lived experiences and either understanding or not of race guides how we function in our roles and as part of the system. We will have to create conditions and shift our organizational culture in a way that will allow for us to learn, grow, and show up in the fullness of our humanity as we model how we serve our students. We will need to develop different skills by way of mindset, language, vocabulary, and the development and application of an equity lens. At a recent policy committee meeting, there were a series of questions raised, I think, by Commissioner James Hassan related to weighted grades and the potential impact and unintended consequences for subgroups of students. That level of questioning and interrogation is what is required of each and every one of us who are charged with service to our students. No one in the organization should be exempt from answering the question, how am I perpetuating or interrupting systems of inequity? An inability to explicitly name the ways we are interrupting suggests that we are perpetuating, albeit unintentionally and without malice. However, the impact contradicts our stated values and beliefs. At this time, considering the persistence of race as a predictor of success or lack thereof, this is a call to action around the adoption of this policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Durant. Just by way of solidifying for people who are present as well as people who may be listening, the import that Dr. Santelises and this board have put on this policy, Dr. Durant is a direct report to Dr. Santelises, so there's not a middle person in between. And she sits at the table with our chief of schools, Dr. Davis, to let you all know that this is happening. This is going to be fabric from soup to nuts in this district. And Dr. Durant, if you could, because this work is volunteer, and we have many members of our community who have put in time and effort in our volunteering, if you could actually introduce the volunteers on the task force who are present, that'll give you a chance to turn back to slide 4. If you need for their names, because this is important work and we couldn't do it alone. And we talk all the time about stakeholder engagement and asking people to step up. But if the board doesn't also turn around and recognize your sacrifice and your willingness to do that for us, then I think we're at an imbalance. So if you could do that for us really quickly, that'd be great.
Sure. Teresa Jones, Chief Achievement and Accountability Officer, is here. Roger Shulman, President and CEO of Fund for Educational Excellence. Sabrina Sutton, Interim Executive Director, Family and Community Engagement, and Ms. Kim Trueheart.
Thank you very, very much. Very much appreciate that. Any questions, Commissioner McFadden?
Not necessarily a question, but I think that we're on the right path. I think this is a great start, and I applaud Dr. Santelises making sure that we have a director of equity in the person of Dr. Tracy Durant, who is able to really lead this work and make sure that all of our young people are able to actualize success equitably. I think that's important. So to you and to your team and to everyone in the room that has had a part in the task force, thank you so much for the work that you're doing for our young people. Because this is important. And I appreciate something that you're saying. Yes, there are other areas outside of race that need to be tackled when it comes to equity, but this is the primary issue of equity right now in our system, in our city, in this state, in our country, all over the world. Prayers go out to New Zealand, and I mean, that it's just horrible what is happening. So we have to become the models of what we want our communities to actually become. I have a particular, it's just, it's wording. In the purpose, in the third paragraph, the second sentence, our board, district administrators, and school-based staff will work together. And I know you all worked hard on it. Can we be even more deliberate in maybe saying prioritizes or, because I see prioritize, it's in number 3A, letter A, where it says disrupting and eliminating systemic inequities. For example, number 5, it has language in it that says the district prioritizes the allocation of resources and things. I think that that is very important when it also talks about in letter B, number 2, the curriculum, and how curriculum and materials must honor the experience, culture, and humanity of students absent the traditionally taught dominant framing and narrative. I think that's important, especially as in teaching and learning and in policy and as the board, we're approving curriculum constantly, and if we're driving it with this in mind, I think it's important. So going back to instead of from we will, more of a priority, because I feel like the we will is broad and can be left open to interpretation versus being extremely direct with the priorities of this district and the priority of the board. What do you think about that?
I think that's important feedback. Thank you.
Okay. That's it.
I want to add my thanks to everyone who's been part of this and worked on this, because this is very exciting. I find myself having sort of a vision as I think about this and what does it mean and what might it mean going forward. And so maybe there's a way that we can, it leads to a increasing series of circles. I know we have circle discussions going on throughout the district now in all kinds of ways. But maybe we can even have more and that we can address these things so it's members of communities getting together in circles to discuss what's going right, what's going wrong. If we communicate that way and learn to work that way, I think we can avoid so many problems that come up when we leave someone out or we forget. So that's my vision that I have listening to this, and thank you all for your hard work.
So my question is a hard one to ask, because this has been work that I have been really championing on the board since the first day I got here. But we also have a fiduciary responsibility as a board. So as we look at this policy, we have to be both aspirational, transformational, and very pragmatic. So things like the requirement for staff training, where does that come from, or where are we anticipating? Dr. S., I don't know if this is a you question, or to Dr. Durant or Mr. Davis. How are we going to fund this? Do we have any ideas? And I say this when Roger's in the room.
You want me to take it? So I think with the funding, it will be part of how we go about funding all of our priorities. I don't necessarily see any difference. I think the real challenge, and cabinet and staff can tell you even from a central just general budget approach this year, I think we are further along the path of using overall prioritization as the driver for budgeting generally. So I think to the earlier reflection and comment and suggestion that Commissioner McFadden shared, I think that's a driver in what the translation in budget will be, right? So in the same way that the board will rightly be asking questions about how does the prioritization of the blueprint activities show up in our budget, I think similarly I can, from my perspective, I see that as being built into a similar question. Where does, the funding of the particular activities and targets of our equity plan fit into the overall budget, right? So that is up until now how I've thought about it. I think similarly, again, like the blueprint, we have a combination of the reprioritization of central dollars alongside opportunities for external funding, which we've also done, and so in some ways it was very appropriate for you to reference Roger Schulman, who is the president of the fund. But I think it's that combination. And then the third piece I would say, which I think both Dr. Durant and Chief Davis have as kind of a core essential to their work is really the question of how are we weaving this into the work we're doing already, right? So how does this become an element of what happens when we do teacher professional development on literacy, right? Like what does that look like? I think some of the initial professional development, training, other things, that's where we'll have to carve out. But I think the ultimate goal is really for this to be integrated into all that we do, so that it's not this compartmentalized training, but that it is the frame through which everyone who does any kind of adult and frankly student development in the district, right, knows that this is an essential component to the work. I think where the biggest lift from a budget perspective is going to come, to your point, Commissioner Hassan, is at the very beginning, right? Because now we cannot assume that all of us have the training, the knowledge base, the tools to be able to implement that authentically. Because we've been saying that for a while. And a lot of school districts have said for a while that, culturally responsive, teaching and materials and everything else is important. And what does that actually look like is going to be some of the lift that we need to do. Does that answer your question?
It absolutely does, and I completely appreciate that it, basically, it was a teed up for very real purposes, that this has to become the fabric of how we do business. And having come from St. Paul when they first started this process, I know the teachers in the trenches and the people on the corners and the families, the conversation was, well, what are you going to take away from my kid in order to make things equitable for those kids? And so I wanted it to be incredibly transparent, that this is not a taking away from some to meet the needs of others, but what this is a shift in how we make decisions and how we operate on an everyday basis to ensure we're meeting the needs of each and every student. So thank you. Dr. Ant, would you like to add anything?
I did. I wanted to add that because it is the how we will do our work, there were already some amazing things happening in the district. Obviously, you all know that. And so last week with the launch of the REACH Fellowship, and I know that Executive Director Stewart is in the room, when they were putting the final pieces of that program together and the arc of learning, they brought me to the table and say, let's really sit down and talk through what the application of an equity lens looks like for something they were already doing. And so I became a part of the development team, and we began to do that work as a faculty group together before rolling out the fellowship. The work that was already happening in schools and professional development, the trainings that principals and resident principals and teachers were already leading in buildings. It's just a matter of how do we take this application of an equity lens, how do we take some of the things that they were already working on and infuse them together so it doesn't feel like something extra. It's just a different way of actualizing our work. And so those things have actually already started to the great work that our colleagues were already doing.
We just need to be able to publicize that and put it out, more so more people throughout the community and city understand that that is what is currently happening. Because you know how the media is, how they are. And they don't always highlight all of the wonderful things that are happening throughout the city before they'll highlight the other things to make us fearful. So I appreciate that.
So the only other piece that I would add is within the COMAR regulations, there it is stated that we'll adopt a lens for decision-making, and I'm really looking forward to a joint partnership working with your team, working with the board, working with other stakeholder leaders to determine what that lens is so that we're all using the same language around, hopefully the whole city, to ask the fundamental question that Commissioner McFadden asks regularly is how are the children? And that we make sure that we are hopefully creating a lens that the Department of Health can adopt, that the city transportation can adopt, so everyone, when they're making their decisions, can answer the same questions.
Well, I'm sorry. The other piece that I would just would also surface with that, because I think that's spot on in terms of how do we have something that actually helps us as a city kind of grapple and reconcile this, and just very forthrightly, I think some of the iteration that I feel strongly needs to happen between this draft and what is final is the ability to give a picture of where we want to go with this. Like I think that there are two pieces that are essential. And what the committee has done fabulously under Dr. Durant's guidance and facilitation, and frankly, just the power of the folks that have been doing the heavy lift in that equity group, is a real acknowledgement in a way, and I'm just going to say this, I'll say it publicly, I'll say it again. I think that there is a healing that can take place when there is an acknowledgement of a wrong that has occurred, right? Like, it is just, that's right? And it's the first step. Like there is a reason why in South Africa, right, when they were dismantling apartheid in the early steps, a lot of it was around just being able to listen to others say, we have wronged you, right? And there's a part of this policy that I think is doing that in a way that validates people's experiences, but that previously our system, as well as others throughout the city and the country, have dismissed as being either a figment of folks' imagination, something to just move on, or it's just the way life is, or da-da-da, that I think is powerful. I will say I think it is also equally powerful and necessary to give a vision of what it looks like when things are operating well. And I think it gets to this way that we very deliberately counter how others will try to take, right, what that acknowledgement looks like, and keep that as the focus, when the real focus is we're acknowledging that not because we want to live in the pain space, but because we want to move to the vision space. And so I think something as we move forward with this is how do we also give the vision space that helps people go through, frankly, what in a lot of ways, and you all know this, Dr. Durant knows very well experientially, which is why part of why she's really leading this, is that to get through the pain of it, there has to be something on the other side. And so that's the other balance, I think, in the communication of this that we're going to have to work on to help kind of get over that bump and keep some of the derailment of language from trying to short circuit what the power of the policy really can be.
You do that so well, Don.
Oh.
Because I'm just brash. What I will say, though, is according to the policy and compliance, there will be an ongoing group that is looking at this per the policy draft. An equity advisory committee will be established to engage with district staff on progress toward implementation of the policy. I just wanted to highlight that so that we know that this is an ongoing work, something that we kind of always have to be talking about and keeping at the forefront of everything that we do. So I think that is also a great thing to add to the compliance area, but something that I just specifically wanted to highlight there. I think it's really great to have that. It's not just a one time we look at it and we're done. It's an ongoing conversation that hopefully. So how will that committee be selected? Do we need to be specific about that, or is that something that you already have brewing in your brain?
I don't have a lot else brewing in my brain right now. So as part of the development of the implementation plan, I think that guidance from that team will emerge as to who and how we select members of the Equity Advisory Committee. So I don't have an answer for that today, but it is part of, as is what you see in implementation in the other compliance areas, one of the things that the task force will tackle.
Again, thank you for this very, very, very important and very challenging work.
Thank you.
With that, we have come to the end of our agenda. Board Exec Gant, do we have anyone who has signed up officially?
Not officially, no.
Okay, so with that, it's become our practice to open the floor to 3-minute comments. If there's anyone in the house that would like to address the room, come on up, sir. We'll get our 3-minute timer because we cut you off here. On it. Woo, we're not going to waste a second.
My name is Mark Johnson. I'm a teacher at Baltimore.
Mr. Johnson, excuse me, please. Just make sure that your mic is on so we can capture what you're saying.
Beautiful.
There we
Thank
go.
you, sir.
Okay, awesome. My name is Mark Johnson, chemistry teacher and department lead at Baltimore Design School. I totally was not planning to speak, but I have to echo the work that Dr. Duran is doing. Our last early release day, she actually was invited by my principal, and we had an equity presentation. The conversations were so powerful that we are still unpacking some of those things, and I commend, I've been teaching in the city for 21 years. I actually came to the meeting for a class, moving in administration, but to hear that and to see the work, as I mentioned to Dr. Durant when she was at the school, that some of those conversations are still ongoing, and it actually led to a colleague coming to me and asking for assistance with kind of trying to understand some of our youth, and it really helped us to begin to continue to grow as staff members in the areas of equity and just trying to understand some of the needs of our students. So I just want to, again, commend that and say thank you, and it's good to see, and any support that I can lend the district in helping to move that equity initiative, be glad to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson. Appreciate your comments and appreciate the support. Oftentimes, those of us that evangelize this message need communion too, so thank you very, very much. Anyone else like to? Ms. Trueheart.
Can I say it? 3 minutes is not enough. Okay. I want to commend Dr. Durant, and you said something that touched me. Her team is her, and we need to bolster that. Last thing I'd like to see is her burnout from this work, and she has championed it and is been skillfully and artfully leading us as a task force, and I very much appreciate what she's done. Board responsibilities earlier on the agenda has to include the concept of transparency and greater transparency around the work that we do to educate our children, and this theme of racial equity lens also needs to be incorporated in the board responsibilities. And to drive home the concept of historically oppressed learners is, in my mind, very important in this work. Harriet Tubman, in her work, talked about the fact that there were a whole lot of slaves she could have freed additionally, but they didn't know they were slaves. We have a lot of people in the city who don't know they have historically been oppressed in academics and learning, underfunded, under-resourced, and everything else. And we need to tell them that, right? We need to get them to understand the value of education. And I don't think we've done a great job. So Commissioner McFadden's point about communicating what we're doing is critically important. The one thing that I'm sort of kicking myself about is the lack of more student engagement around this topic. And I think we have to be more intentional about that, bringing young people in circles to have dialogue about this. And the last point that I want to make is I woke up yesterday and I said I want to rebrand Baltimore as the city that educates, because we're going to transform K-12 education. There was a time that we were the city that reads. We've got the highest number of charters. We got world-renowned institutions of learning. We've got 2 HBCUs, and we got no offense, a crappy K-12 system. Let's fix that. Let's ensure that we become the city that educates at a world-class level. I think we're on the path to doing it. But I think a slogan that says that is our intent would really be helpful. Thank you.
Aspirational words and actionable actions.
I'm pushing it. The city that educates,
Thank you.
transforming K to 12.
Yeah. Oh, Commissioner McFadden has a question for you.
Yes.
It's not a question, Ms. Trueheart, it's just to piggyback on what you're saying. Yes, we need to be the city that educates, and it's not just our young people at times. It is all of the community, all of every parent, every citizen. I think that that's important. To your point, you just made a big point. There are people that don't know that they have been disenfranchised. They just think it's normal for them to be neglected, for them to be underserved. So I think that that is important. But to your point about the board make up the policy that what's the policy? Powers and responsibilities, there we go. BBA. Can we put language in there that deals with transparency and equity in alignment to the draft equity policy, even, as we move forward in going through the readers and passing that? Before that even happens, is it a way for us to kind of incorporate more of that language in that policy? Because this still has to go before, we still got to do first and second reader.
Absolutely. I'll take a look at it. I'm not at the process, but I'll look into see how we can add that, incorporate that.
Thank you.
I think that is driving what is happening.
Sure,
And
just
so,
like
yeah.
the board's mission and vision. What do we believe? What are our beliefs?
Exactly, your values.
And how does that, exactly, the values, and how does that drive every piece of work that we do in the system? I think it's important.
Can I make one more comment?
Only because we love you.
Thank you. It's mutual. I have been speaking the point that I want us to understand that violence truly is a health issue, and that I want a board position filled by a health professional that can ensure that that piece of the conversation is weighted in your discussions about violence in school, as well as the work of educating our children, which could cause harm, which could cause trauma, and ensuring that that lens is added to the board decision process. And, I can talk a lot, right? And I'm doing that every place I go. As a matter of fact, I have an appointment with Dr. Perman at the University of Maryland, because I want him to put out the word that we want to recruit somebody good to serve in that role on the board. And I don't know whether it's an inherent position, whether it's an adjunct position, but I think there, in my mind, there's value for that, because we can no longer treat violence as, an everyday occurrence. No, there's something there to attribute it as a health condition that can be healed.
And to that end, there'll be, I believe, 2 board members who rotate off as early as possible, or possibly as early as July 1, if the mayor finds an appointment to replace them. So that would be a conversation we could all be having with her along the way, to intentionally seek people to meet some of the deficits of the current board.
And I don't know whether we need to change the policy to say that, because right now the configuration says you'll have one of this and one of that.
That would be a legislative change. So at the earliest that could happen is next legislative cycle.
I got it. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Sir, would you like to join us? And while you're coming up, just to let everyone know, we're very casual about this at policy now. But this is not the practice of the board. The practice of the board is that you sign up in advance and you have a maximum of 3 minutes. Understanding we're flexible on that as we create a culture of people who want to come to present at policy. But if we get to a point, at any point, the board will say, no, 3 minutes and pre-sign-up is necessary. Just to let you know that this is an exception so that no one gets feathers ruffled later.
I got you.
Welcome.
How you doing? I'm Javen Carter. I'm a fifth grade math and science teacher at North Bend Elementary School.
Could you do me a favor and spell your name for me, because I want to make sure we get it right on the record?
Javan. And I think I met Ms. Durant a couple years ago at a TFA. I think you spoke at a TFA event. Yes, and you have a left-handed son, or yes, okay. I remember her story so
she's
vividly.
a good teacher. That's what it means.
Yeah.
She'll remember what she.
I remember her
about.
story so vividly, especially when it comes to being culturally responsive and things like that. I know she was speaking on like how she kept telling her son to do certain actions with his left hand, and right hand when he was naturally left-handed. And I think that's very important, that we as educators don't always put what we think is best for a child, but also let them express things in their own unique way. And I just wanted to know, like, what can educators do to partner with you and how to address these issues, because I think that, like I say, education is changing a lot, and I think that a lot of educators around the city have a lot of stories and a lot of things to offer when it comes to addressing that issue. Because I really remember that speech, and it really resonated with me. However, I feel as though that we don't have professional development on it all the time. Even myself and for others that really do not know how to be culturally responsive and know about equity.
Dr. Durant, do you mind coming up? I think he specifically was asking for ways.
He just let me know.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Name's on the list.
So I'm glad you remember that story. My son would be mortified if he knew that I was still telling it. But I think the point that you raised, and it goes back to what we were saying in terms of implementation, one of the things that we're going to have to do is have a common language, a common vocabulary, a common way to engage around these conversations, and that's going to really require some capacity building. And so one of the things that we will be doing is talking to individuals, and I've not yet formed in my mind how we will seek to get that input, but I can tell you that I'm fully committed to hearing the voices of the people closest to impacting our students and the voices of the students themselves about what they want to see and how they want to be treated. We felt like the most important thing for us to do at this juncture was to get the policy through and adopted so that it gives us permission, right, to say out loud all of the things that we want to do. So note it. Make sure I get your contact information before you leave.
I got you. Thank you.
And I can attest to Dr. Durant's work prior to coming to Baltimore City and Baltimore County, definitely engaged teachers and principals, cross-district groups. There were a lot of opportunities up to, through, and including school-based professional developments. So as you talk to your colleagues and your friends and start to build interest around this, we always have the early adapters and the late adopters and then the other folks, and this is an all three on board process. So appreciate your local line leadership in this work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner McFadden.
And I'm excited, not for you, Dr. Durant, but just to see two black male educators in the room
Yes.
that are advocating for their young people and for the young people around the city. I think it's incredible. And to your point, what's his last name?
McCarter?
Mr. Carter? This evening, actually, at 5:30, there is a Black Teacher Recruitment and Retention Working Group happening that the district has been putting together to kind of wrap our brains around recruiting teachers of color, but particularly Black teachers. And I think that this could be a good opportunity also to talk about issues of equity, to perhaps attract more folks from throughout the city or abroad to kind of tackle this work of educating our young people. So that's actually happening tonight at 5:30 at Patterson High School. So if you know folks, I would tweet out, Facebook it, text folks, and let them know that that's an opportunity also to bring that teacher voice to the conversation of what is actually happening in our district already.
Anyone else? Any closing comments, doctors?
No, I just want to give another big thank you to the entire Equity Committee for their work, and in particular, the leadership of Dr. Durant. I think her arrival in the district came at a time where we were very hungry as a district. The appetite had been growing for this kind of work, as I think we learned from one school example, and I, on a regular basis, at least once or twice a week, let her know how good she makes me look from the work, but it is her lifting the work, and I am not ignorant of that fact. So I want to thank her for her leadership and everyone else who's part of the work, so thank you.
Yes, again, thank you very much. So our next our next policy meeting, because of spring break, we do not have an April meeting, but our next will be May 21st from 3:30 to 5:30 in this room, where we will discuss policy IHB, which is public charter schools, JJA, which is student clubs, conversion of Board Rule 405, which is resignation and retirement, conversion of Board Rule 601.02, which is the advisory nature of community engagement and communications. And prior to that, tomorrow night in this room, we'll have policy IHB, the charter schools policy, that'll be introduced in May. We're going to, as we started with the equity policy, invite public comment prior to the drafting of that policy. So we'll invite you to come to this room with us between 6:30 and 8:30. You can sign up in advance, or do they need to be here by 4:30 to sign up for that?
They can sign up an hour prior before. So 6:15 to 5:15.
4:15 to 5:15 or 6?
I'm sorry, 5:15 to 6:15.
5:15 to 6:15. You can sign up in the front to address any concerns, issues, or ideas. And I'm really hopeful that we'll have teachers. Ideally, we'll have students. We'll have parents and community members representing both traditional schools and charter schools to help us really flesh out a policy that's going to work for our entire portfolio of schools. So with that, we are going to go ahead and say we look forward to seeing you tomorrow from 6:30 to 8:30 in this room, and at 4:44 p.m. we're adjourned. Thank you.